to do is when this image comes up, when you're getting your raw feed in, this is why these cameras are so nice, is because I can really control how much light's coming in. And you can see, it's probably hard to see, but there's like some blue and pink lines that are showing what the software thinks it's tracking right now. And so this is not what we want. The bottom screen is showing what it thinks the light source is, so this is crazy. Like, what we want to see is like a nice dime-sized perfect circle, and that means we're getting a good capture. So once we get this running, the next thing to do is just attach a light source to whatever we're using. I like to use kind of typical medium width sort of graffiti writing implements, but one of the ideas of the project is that, like, graffiti writers have their own technologies and their own sort of DIY circles, and they are often modifying markers. They're often like very, like, the marker they're using or whatever implement is like very personal to what their style is and what they're doing. And so part of the idea of this project is it's not about like meeting graffiti writers and handing them a mouse, which would be obviously like sort of antithetical to the project. And so there's disadvantages that come along with motion capture, but one of the advantages is you can take any light source and attach it to like whatever they bring in. So if someone comes in with spray paint, you can just quickly mount a light source to that. You can mount it to a marker. I know that the monochrome guys are going to be doing an LED throwaway workshop here later, so even like simple LEDs can be used for tracking devices. Like any light source you can get on can probably be used as a tracking device. I like to use ones that have click button on and off, like something I can turn on and leave on, as opposed to something I have to ask people to hold and press, but that's really neither here nor there. So this part's easy. I usually mount the light source to the top and then keep the camera, if you want to keep the camera in a way so that the hand doesn't block the light source, and I find that if you go from the top, that typically tends to work pretty decently. So this part is not rocket science. But if there's like a chisel tip, I try to keep this mounted above the chisel tip and then keep it pulled back from the page enough that if someone's using if they're rotating their hand, they're not going to hit it. But again, this is like pretty simple and a bit of trial and error. I mean, beyond that, there's not much more that has to happen with the capturing with the light sources. The brighter the light, of course, the more difference you'll get in your threshold value between the ambient light and the light that's being tracked. So bright light sources can be more helpful than dim ones. So this is like pretty close. If I was in a dark room right now, this would look super bright to your eye. Like right in here and now, it's like not really going to blow anything away. So that's kind of set up and off and running. So if I go on here now, we can see that everything is still. If you just look at this window, you can see this is obviously not a clean capture. So the first thing I usually do is adjust, when I have this situation, I can usually adjust this down, and just by using the camera, not even using any of the software, you can see I'm already starting to get a pretty clean capture, right? The second sort of thing we can be playing with is, if I go back to the first tab, if I can do this with my left hand, there's a threshold value. So there's not a lot of like fancy settings in this app because it's meant to be sort of used hopefully pretty easily. But the one that we're going to really be caring about is this threshold. This is doing a similar thing to opening up the light in the camera, but it's just saying how different is this pixel from the pixels surrounding it, and based on that level, it's going to say use it or don't use it. And so you can. Right now I'm actually pretty close. Like I'm getting a pretty decent capture with the way it is. Like you can see here, it's a pretty. The size is decent, the tracking seems to be good. So in terms of the lighting, especially where we are now, I would call this decent. Like I would call this software kind of set. And you can click save, and then if it crashes, we'll have the settings. The only other thing to keep in mind is that there's two modes, one for capturing behind the hand and one for capturing through a piece of glass. So if I hit return, then I'm going to start recording. So usually I'll meet with the graffiti writer and I'll just say, okay, start writing, and I'll start recording, and another enter to stop. And so at that point, it leaves recording mode and it goes into an edit mode. And the only reason the edit mode is here because you need a way to begin and end the tag when the graffiti writer is starting and stopping, because like timing it would of course be difficult. So in this mode, the way it's working is the Z is kind of linear, so it's as if you're writing on a page, it's kind of constantly pulling away. And one of the ideas of that is it's kind of about data visualization, so it's about trying to understand more about how the ink is layering up, but also from an editing standpoint it makes it easier because you can kind of see where everything is beginning and ending. So right click is going to rotate, all the panning and zooming and tilting all happens between left click and right clicking and dragging, and so like right now left click is zooming, and if I hold shift it'll pan. Similarly, like right click and drag is going to rotate, and if I hold shift it'll rotate around the other axis. But all that is just so that I can figure out where this tag was starting. So I get this start point and end point. So by clicking and dragging these 2 points, I can set where, like, what was junk at the beginning and what was junk at the end. Does that make sense? And then you can name the file here, and then when you hit enter again, it'll take you into a playback mode and show you what you've captured. And at this point, it's also saved the .gml file to the same directory, the root directory that the app is running in. So maybe, just as a quick example, let me just name one really quick, and then I can go find it and show you how to load it into the playback. Like, it's really a simple, dumb, easy XML file. And part of the idea for this project too is that it's meant to be sort of an introduction to sort of hacking and getting used to playing with XML. So there are like people doing advanced things with this, which I'll show in a second. But the idea is that you open this up and it's kind of human readable. Like, it's meant to be kind of like introductory, like hobbyist hackers, hobbyist programmers can get involved with this. And so you can see, like, this is the crux of what a point gives you. So it's just x, y times z. And so the playback app, it's going to look similar. And when you launch it, it's going to load all the GML files in that directory. And then the playback mode has some functionality that the recording mode doesn't have. The kind of basic way the visualization is working is, besides the Z dimension, which is meant to like give you some more understanding of how this ink is layering up, it's not meant to represent the actual ink that's on the page. It's meant to represent the motion of the tag, and so that's one reason also you're capturing a single line. Like there's of course other softwares that can capture multiple strokes, but for my interest, I like recording all the movements. Like when the pen comes up and moves to the other side, like graffiti is very dictated by like writing in a very specific place at a specific time, and so the ink on the wall is like not just about someone's vision of what a graffiti tag should look like. It's like dictated by, you know, who's walking around the corner, what part of town is it in. Like you have like 5 to 10 seconds to make this form, and so for me, capturing all that motion was just an interest from a research standpoint. And so that's why I'm getting all the movements, so even when the pen's up. And the other way it's working is that when, like, the thinner the line is, the faster the pen was moving. So even when this isn't playing back, you can get some sense of like the motion. And then the particles that are getting thrown off are kind of based on velocity. So if you round a corner very smoothly, for example, you get this even throw of particles, whereas if you had a jagged one, you'd get a spike. And that's all about, the intent is meant to sort of just amplify that motion. It's all about like trying to see this sort of like dance that happens when no one's looking, right? So that's the basic functionality of the playback mode. There's some other things that you can turn on, like there's an audio setting that'll just take the audio from the mic and you can get interaction with, so if you're projecting this outside, you could be picking up ambient things. Like I've done projections where when cars go by, they can like honk the horn and like affect the graffiti around them. It has, you know, if you're having a party, it doesn't look too bad either, only I don't actually like using it in that way, but I must say it is kind of fun to put on when DJs are around. There's also more settings for doing things outside with it, like there's an architectural interface. So for example, if we were projecting here, like one of my interests in graffiti too is the fact that it's not just about, like good graffiti writers aren't just slapping stuff up anywhere. They're very conscious of like what the architecture is, what the structures are, how they're fitting in. Like there's all these thoughts that are going on that isn't just like blah, you know? And so the software is meant to work the same way also. So if we were going to project here, there's a way where you can tell the software where all these corners are, like where the edges are, so that when it's playing back, it can interact with that. So just to show you what that looks like, there's also this warping mode so that you can, if you're projecting at an angle or you're projecting on a surface that isn't true, you can set this so that it's like, you can deal with this outside of the sort of keystoning functionality of the projector. Just reset the warping. So the basic way the architecture settings work is if you're projecting on something, let me just turn off the playback mode for a second. I'm going to hit clear, and then I'm going to hit new structure. And then, let's see. I have to turn on use architecture in the main menu. And then once I do that, it just gives me like a simple drawing interface. And so if I was projecting here, I'd just have this screen up, and I'd outline all these shapes, which just takes about a minute or two. Some of these are from other people. Can you see this?
So everyone. Sweet. Thanks.
So this is the graffiti analysis software that I was just showing. This is some touchscreen stuff. This is a 3D import for 3D Studio Max. This is another piece of software which I can show anyone who's interested, which brings in a GML and then exports an STL, so it builds 3D geometry around the tag. And then you can send that to 3D printing, whoever has access to those. This is a processing sketch. This is the iWriter interface. These are some of the things that Temp has drawn. There's the robot again. This is an artist named Benjamin Gulan who hooked it up to a print ball, like a robot that holds a paintball gun.